You're a very special multitude to me because you're my multitude.
There you go.
Well, I always tell my students that when, because everything I do has to do with narrative, so when I teach, the only research I do is to gather stuff from my own projects or inspiration to beat over the heads and shoulders of my students. So everything I do as a professor is helping them make their way through the creative arc process and learn it in not only intellectually, but as actors talk about sense memory. And you have to do something, it sticks with you in brain and body, and I want them to go through sense memory through the creative process. Lose, win, throw things away, make mistakes, skin your knee and everything. And so I also tell them that when you write, the paper talks back to you, tells you what's missing, what's not so good, what's really great you have to work harder on. And that's what I was doing all last night. So this will be sort of a customized on-the-fly presentation, although it's got some goodies and everything. But what I want to do is I want to talk about how the environment works as a theme space. And really, that's going to be the two approaches. That one is the intentions of the people who make the theme space. And the other one is how people who enjoy the theme space, or at least tolerate it, who've come to the theme space, what they make of it, how it affects them emotionally. And so I'm using story as a lens in both cases, because in what I do and in themed entertainment, traditional themed entertainment, meaning Walt Disney Imagineering, Universal Creative and everything, where people are going to spend millions in a little place, there has to be a conventional wisdom about how it gets done the right way so that people have a good experience, and they're happy to leave money there. And so that's what we'll be looking at. So I will, in the car, come on, we're going to go to Disneyland, take a look at the fundamentals that Walt Disney and his team created, which now seems so old hat in a way, because when they did it in the 50s, nobody was doing stuff like that. And now, as you'll see, it's being done almost everywhere. The taco place, pretty soon we'll probably see themed bathrooms. I don't know. Actually, I think I recall that you found one.
Yeah. Milton Hall has them.
Okay.
It's like a German discotheque.
You see, you can't even be Monty Python anymore. The moment you go someplace, someone's done it. So this is really tough. So where's my dance? Just the paddle doing it?
Oh yeah, just the.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. So. Anyhow, I could have gone to medical school or law school, but I became a feral, creative type of person, and I blame my parents for giving me love and support, making it possible, and I blame this guy here, okay? Because what he did was he invented this wonderful, I was going to call it discipline, but it's really more of a rich layering of craft and a way of seeing possibilities. And I watched him do it on television because he was smart enough to realize that would be entertaining. And I think that speaks to how intuitively intelligent he was. That we were in our backyards as kids digging holes and building things out of scrap lumber. And on television, he was doing what we wanted to do. We would fill up a hole with water, it would sink in. He'd fill up a hole with water, it supports a whole ship, So I think right away I recognize this guy's really actually a kid, but he's a kid with a budget, okay? And wonderful things came out of that. And they say at Disney that story is everything and everything is story. And we'll get into that in a minute. But basically the idea is the foundation for everything is story. And the other side of that is that in telling your story in three-dimensional space, everything in that space you consider, how can it help me tell a story? We're going to look at some very, very rich environments here. Well, so first of all, let's start with Disneyland. And I want to tell you my credentials here. I visited Disneyland when it was 5 months old. And so I've been living with it. I saw it being built on TV, and then my parents took me when it was less than a year old. So I claim over the decades some natural fieldwork experience on the intuitive basis. You know, no structures were involved necessarily. So Disneyland is a singular innovation in entertainment, and it also makes a cultural statement. It isn't just an entertainment device. One of the things I like about it is all of the theme stuff now, as far as I can tell, there might be something that's made by an irascible, original individual, but it's corporately made, which doesn't mean it's bad. It's just it takes a lot of people on the team to get it done right. But this was a driving thing for Walt Disney, who, the story goes, wanted a nice place where he could take his daughters instead of some amusement park, you know, with peanut shells all over the ground and everything. But I think once he started doing it, I think he got the bug in a bad way. You know, it became one of those mountains that you have to climb. And so he brought a lot of himself into that, and part of what he brought into it was his love of Americana and America. You know, he probably idealized his childhood. Marceline, Missouri was not that beautiful a place, but he lived on a farm outside of town. And his life experience told him that it was a good place, a good thing, and he wanted to bring that into Disneyland. And so we have these three lands, and each one has a certain element of the American spirit that Walt Disney tried to present. And you know, Main Street, of course, is the classic small town. You know, that's where people are neighborly, and a person can put a little money aside and do whatever you want in order to try to make your own life. You know, it's a very American thing. You don't do necessarily what your father did. You do what you need to do as well as you're willing to work hard. And in that Main Street town, if you work hard, then you gain something. Frontierland, of course, celebrates the pioneer spirit, as expressed in our history and our folklore, and that great American tradition of the tall tale. And Tomorrowland is also pioneering, is just pushing out into the future. And as you may know, in Disneyland there's no present. It's either the past or the future, or fantasy. You leave the present in the parking lot. So the question is, how did Walt Disney pursue his vision, okay? And create a story-based place that people could enter and be part of. And what was the method he used? Because you have to replicate this, right? This is heavy lifting. It's got to work to make this unique form of entertainment. Now, first of all, he looked at Disneyland in a way that nobody had looked at an amusement park, and since he was transferring amusement park to a theme park, he looked at it as a theatrical experience. This is new. And it was a matter, yes, in terms of creativity, you create the space like a set designer creates it. But in order to animate the space and make it work for people, you turn it into a theatrical performance. And everything about Disneyland is performance and staging. You know, everybody who's out in view is cast, whether it's the guy with the little broom, or it's people dressed up as characters, or it's the guy who runs the bus or whatever. And they even have terminologies totally theatrical. The administration office is production office, and the unseen areas are back of house, and out in front is on stage. So it's that sensibility, you know. I mean, he combined a movie maker's ability to visualize with the theatrical sensibility. And he did it very well. That's DNA for Disney. That's part of the reason that they've nurtured it and it's worked for them. And that you see other people around the world imitating it. And in certain countries, really flopping, you know. It's you know, ghost theme parks and everything. So what Disney done, this whole theatrical thing is known as the art of the show officially. You know, John Hench, one of the senior designers from the beginning, called it that and wrote a book about it. And it involves visual storytelling. And as I mentioned, this comes from the movies. And what they do is they actually thought of the guest experience as being the camera point of view. So the way you perceive and experience the place is always from the camera point of view. You know, movie making. So sight lines, reveals, things like that are all planned. You know, by the way, just as an aside, I read in the New Yorker that George Washington did that with Mount Vernon. He had an angle where you approached and you sort of went around some trees, made a left, and there it is. So George was aware of the possibilities of a reveal. You know, we don't know that he was into any other aspects of cinematography, but he seemed to have gotten that right. Okay. Well, once again, I'm having so much fun. I'm behind on my slides, but that's better because there's nothing like PowerPoint pushing you around. You know. In any case, the theatrical sensibility, the animation on the streets, the things like that, the visual storytelling. And by the way, as movie makers and animators, they even use storyboards to conceptualize and plot out how the place would look and how it would be built. So using movie logic, for instance, when you enter from one of the tunnels, your vision embraces the town square, and everything's there for you. Clip-clop of the horses and things are going around. But as you move and you explore and you reposition from either tunnel, now you get yourself a really great long shot. And this is it. This is the money shot. You know, you look all the way down, and what have you got down there? You've got the visual magnet. So you can have fun on Main Street, and you get pulled through there, and that's your orientation. You have to go that way. There's only one entrance to the park. And you're told something wonderful is up there, and there'll be other adventures waiting for you if you go there when you're ready. And when you get there, you have a hub and spoke structure, which is now very common, but then, no, it wasn't common. And you have, once again, the intuitive sense of what a guest needs, what human beings need to enjoy a place. You need a key elevation that tells you where the heck everything is. I mean, in European cities, actually, a cathedral works very nicely. But in the case of building a place for entertainment and leisure, the idea of putting your key visual, your key elevation in the center, and having people always come back to it so they can rotate around and pick up another one, you never get lost. The other thing, too, is you pick the right thing. If you're going to put a visual magnet, it's got to be symbolic, right? Otherwise, you're wasting space. And, of course, the castle typifies the whole idea of the fantasy journey, the whole idea of a million stories, all of them out of imagination, all of the ability to transport yourself out of the now to fantasy. One other aspect of cinematography that I found fascinating is that John Hench said, you know what a cross dissolve is, you know, in film. You know, one image is slowly fading while the other is coming in over on top of it. They thought physically about doing crossfades using a sensory surround, so that when you went from Main Street to Adventureland, it wasn't like you make a right-hand turn and boom, there it is, fronds and elephant tusks. No. You gradually make a transition, and the signals telling you, they aren't always conscious, you know. But, I mean, you perceive them, but you don't think, oh, really, he's transitioning me very nicely. It seems very natural. What happens is, and I'll quote him for you. He said, subtle sensory clues indicate that a change is happening. As guests walk from Main Street to Adventureland, walkway surfaces change from concrete to cut stone. Wrought iron railings give way to bamboo. Main Street's music yields to animal growls and howls. A planked bridge highlights the final moment of transition. I like bridges. I always put them in when I do things, because crossing water or changing that whole suspension bridge or a nice solid bridge, you feel you're transitioning, and there's a separation. You're trying to put a lot of little fantasy spaces or story spaces together in a small area. You want to send signals that, yeah, this really is a different place. And then put lots of bushes so they can disappear and everything like that. And anyhow, he said there's no confusion for the guests. The soles of their feet tell them where they are. You know, and their hands feel it, their eyes and ears know it too. They are 1,000,000 miles away from mainstream USA. So right there you have a description of one of the most fundamental aspects of the themed experience at a Disney park, immersion. Immersion. And sensory clues are part of that. But Disney's attention to detail at every turn completes the effect. If you know anything about production design in the movies, the production designers get the script and they say, we have to make an office for this guy. This guy's a retired diver and he runs a bar down near the waterfront. Well, they just go crazy. That's great. You gave me the clues. And they use every physical detail they can to say, this is the guy, this is his life, he was a Navy SEAL, you know, here's half a canoe that got chomped by something awful out to sea, and he hung it up, you know. Maybe that explains why the stitches are there. And the wonderful thing about all the secretion of detail is that part of the immersion is people start interpreting. And Scott was just talking about a bit about that. The layers of detail at Disney, there's always something to read, to pick, to look at. You have to put two and two together. It's fun, so you never get tired. And every time you come back, there's another one you missed. And what this does, it's kind of a hyper reality. It idealizes things. You know, the paint's a little brighter, the details are a little more higher definition and everything. But the volume of them seems to say, you know this isn't real, but you've made an agreement with us to step into a story phase, and we made it feel real, didn't it? Because it's got all the elements that a real space would have. There's a story logic here in the background and why the stuff is there. By the way, I mentioned this is an artifact example. This ship is actually a replica of the Columbia, the original Columbia that was sent on a mission early in the country's history. But they couldn't find nautical plans, so they got the plans for the HMS Bounty, which is a ship of almost the same type. And they went to that much trouble. When you look at it, even if you're not a nautical archaeologist, you say, damn, that's one serious ship. That's the point. So that's the kind of work they do. Here's a wonderful example from New Orleans Square. Hyper-reality. Everything is seductive. Everything's just a little brighter and shinier. And even the shadows are planned to be sort of rich and suggestive and atmospheric. Okay? So M.J. King, director of the Center for Cultural Studies and Analysis, calls these experiential design techniques the Disney effect. And in an interview with the LA Times, she said, it's huge. Disney has just permeated our culture. It's almost easier to look for something that has not been affected than to list its contributions. So I'm not listing its contributions. And I know you have other things to do today. Another reaction to Disneyland and the whole art and craft of what he was doing came from architects and urban planners in the late 50s and 60s. James Rouse, who was an urban planner and advisor on urban affairs for JFK, actually said, he was then doing a keynote at Harvard in '63, and he said he called Disneyland the greatest piece of urban design in the US today. Some culture critics are going to fall out of their chair if they read that. But that was his interpretation of the quality of the work and the innovation involved. And Robert Venturi, as an architect, is one of the leading postmodernist lights. He said that Disney World is nearer to what people really want than anything architects have ever given them. It's a symbolic American utopia. So Disney's design has permeated everything. And I'm just going to hit you with a few quick examples. It's gone into water parks, other theme parks. It's gone into retail. It's gone into restaurants. We see it everywhere. And here's one of my favorite examples. This is the Grove in Los Angeles, in the Fairfax district. And you can just taste the Disney. I mean, you can inhale it as you approach and everything. And if it isn't enough to see Disney in a retail shopping complex, when daylight comes, take a look at that. Okay? We're on Main Street. And that trolley actually goes up and down the Main Street in the Grove, and it even has a trolley barn, just like cities used to have back in the 19th century for their trolleys and everything. And my last example, I just love this example, theming comes to libraries, okay? This is the Cerritos Library in Cerritos, California. It was built on the principles of the experience economy in terms of customer service and in terms of the environment, theming. They wanted to make it seductive. They wanted to provide it with an atmosphere that sort of suggested that curiosity would be rewarded. The best example, there's several sections, they all have different themes, but let's just look at the children's section, okay? All right, we're all Stuart Little, we're all on our way into an adventure, and it's all about books. And once you're inside, are we themed or are we not themed, everybody? We've got a dinosaur skeleton, we've got a lighthouse, we've got the heavens above, and there's a lot of other goodies. So it's a wonderful way to teach children to fall in love with libraries. Well, 50 years of excellence, you know, that was 50 years, about the mid-2000s, 50 years of excellence. And so the validations, I've showed you all these things. Everybody's copying it. Disney's done it. They've done a wonderful job. What's another validation? When you forget to do it or don't do it well. That's a validation of the value of the art of the show. Now, who do you think would make a mistake like that? The Chinese? They have ghost theme parks. Any guesses? Disney. Disney fell off. They fell off the wagon. California Adventure was just a wonderful idea. I mean, how can you go wrong, right? Beach boys, surfing, car culture, you know, the grandeur of the big trees and everything. I mean, how can you mess that up? What they did was management made a big mistake. One mistake was they skewed it too much to adults. Disney's always been a family brand. You know, expect that. Number two, they only had one really innovative, original wow attraction, and that was Soarin' over California. Wonderful, everybody loved it. Everything else was off the shelf. They were nice rides, but you could buy them, and you get them at other regional theme parks, but you don't get them at Disney across the street from Disneyland. So the people complained about that. And then there was the other issue of how do you compete with the real California, which is just outside the door. You know, take a freeway up to Malibu, up to Carmel, down to Del Mar. And so the other thing that, and this is hard, almost hard to imagine, very few Disney characters in California Adventure. So fortunately we can enjoy this because it's a great example for us. We didn't spend any money, we didn't suffer any reviews from the corporate management. So it was time for the Imagineers to saddle up. Okay, this is like a football team that's had its legs tied to bowling balls, you know, because of it. And they were finally, and people said, we got to change this. And they, what happened was, so they let the Imagineers do what Imagineers do best. And the Imagineers roared back like a team with an appetite, you know, like they want to sink their teeth into cattle on the hoof and bring it down and do what they do best. So they did this. First of all, they changed the whole entrance experience, okay? There was like a large area that you went in, you went to different lands, but there wasn't really, there was some nice design, but you didn't have a story statement, and they went right for the story statement. They said, okay, Main Street, but this time, it's 1923 Los Angeles, and we're gonna create some of the classic architecture with the Carthay Circle Theater, which is no longer there, as the centerpiece. It was a classic. I went there with my grandmother to see Around the World in 80 Days. They took it down, shouldn't have done that. But so this lovely artifact is back. It's the elevation, it's the castle, okay? And the other thing is what's being said. It's 1923, Walt's just arrived in town. It's time for imagination, it's time for innovation, it's time for following your dreams. Things are possible, this is the beginning. That's what Buena Vista Street says. Buena Vista is the street that the studio's on right now. So great, there's a logic, it's positive, it's exciting, and physically it opens up to you. Everybody understands a nice main street, okay? And then the other thing they did was, and this was the keeper, this is the basket, the ball that went through the basket without touching the rim. They created Cars Land, okay? This is it. John Lasseter was working on Cars, the movie, at Pixar, while Kevin Rafferty was working on Car Land. He knew that car culture would be great, so he said, well, let's get that in there. We'll build it around car culture. That's a great California trope, and we'll have lots of things to do with it. Then Disney bought Pixar. So now the conversation is, oh, you're doing Cars, you know, and we're doing Car Land. Thank you. And so it came down after a year that John Lasseter called Kevin and said, how about Cars Land? Okay, we've got a movie, we've got all these possibilities, and that's what they did. But both teams, separately, jumped in cars and went out to Route 66. They drove up and down Route 66, they stayed at motels, they ate at all the restaurants, they chatted up the locals, and there's one of the characters right now. And what they were absorbing was this wonderful spirit of Route 66, this small town America on the wide open road where people feel totally free to be themselves. They were neighborly, they were welcoming, they were original, you know. They were great eccentrics and joyful individualists. So they decided that their inspiration for doing Cars Land were these people. They had to get that personality in the place. Disney's always been said to have heart when they design something. It's part of what makes it work. And that wasn't in California Adventure, and here they were going to go to ground. So they do that, and they create, you know, Cars Land, and they recreate the rugged Southwest. If you take a look at those mountains, that's the Cadillac Range, by the way. If you look at the fins sticking out of all the rock work, you know, each one is modeled after a Cadillac tail fin ranging between 1957 and I think 62. You know, so they did that. They built this beautiful surrounding land to remove it from California Adventure and kind of put it out in the Southwest. And they got the spirit into it, and then they also recreated the town of Radiator Springs, and they put in all the quirky types of businesses, and they matched a business to each character from the movie. Every character has a business, whether it's a store or a ride or something. So they're kind of your hosts. So that's another idea. You've come to town, they've opened their doors to you. The car characters are your hosts. You're welcome in town. The other thing they did, once again, getting back to story here, they did detailed backstories of all the characters. Kevin Rafferty wrote most of the stories. The idea is you can have that detail I was talking about, Seaver's house, you know, where people are going to interpret and people are going to enjoy. What happens is you do it to them fairly well. If you have a backstory, you have the source of all the ideas that you need in order to create a space. So Tow Mater owns a junkyard, you know, and he has a ride for everybody. And if you get close to the junkyard, there's all of these little details that relate to Tow Mater's personality and Tow Mater's life. And then one of my favorite buildings is Flo's V8 Cafe. Okay, so Flo didn't have a tremendous backstory for the movie, but Kevin wrote a whole thing for her. Flo was, if you remember the girl groups from the 60s, Diana Ross and the Supremes and everything, Flo was a showgirl, show cop rather, okay? She was part of a group, a four-car group of show cars that were touring, you know, and they were a vocal group. And when they got to Radiator Springs, the ladies wanted to go get touched up. They wanted to go to Ramon's House of Body Paint and get touched up, but Ramon looked at Flo and said, "You're perfect the way you are." She decided to stay. So anyhow, so she opened up this diner, and all the design motifs, you're looking at a rear view mirror. you know, and you're looking at part of the history of Flo and her Motorama girls, but everywhere you go in the environment, there's, oops, no, I'm fine. Yeah, this is, it's a little too dark, you can't see all the detail. This is the view from her dining room out there at the range. And on the right, you see the little disc? It's one of her gold records. And you find posters from their shows and all kinds of stuff. You can just dig. But I love the architecture too. And once again, you got a classic diner, all American diner. Just one more character. This is Luigi's Casa della Tires. He is a tire merchant, but he also has a tire ride for you to ride. But when we want to build his backstory and let people interpret, we have an office for him. I wish my office was that tidy. But you look at everything, his files, and I mean, he's a Ferrari fanatic. There's Ferrari stuff there. He has a background as a part of a pit crew. So there's all kinds of stuff and memorabilia from the races he's helped with. There's a map of Italy on the wall. And my favorite, if you look here, you and I might have a cup of coffee when we're working at our desk, or a Diet Coke or something. He's got a bottle of oil. And it's not just a bottle of oil. I mean, that's the kind of bottles that you used to buy oil from in the 50s, you know, and everything. You didn't buy cans. You bought these big, huge, tall glass bottles at the gas station, and then they poured them in. So occasionally, I guess he needs a refresher of oil. They worked everything out. It's just remarkable. And then finally, the pièce de résistance. This is a way of getting people. I mean, people can enjoy it in every way, but there's got to be one big thing, one wow that people can really feel exhilarated on. And this is a chance to have a wild ride through the Red Rock country, and it's the Radiator Springs Racers. How am I doing for time?
So I think we should actually stop now to ask the audience if they have any questions,
Okay.
and I might have a question or two if they don't.
Okay.
I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, that's all right. I just wanted to deliver something. I only had another 30 minutes for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.